All right, so we all know how it goes. New year, new goals, but also new excuses on why not to pursue those goals. For the longest time, I put off my goal of starting a podcast because, well, I was intimidated. I wasn't sure how to do anything. I wasn't sure if I wanted to invest the time in doing it, and I certainly didn't want to pay other people to do that stuff for me. Luckily, I came across Spotify for Podcasters, which calmed my nerves as they allowed me to do everything from recording to editing to scheduling and even monetizing my podcast from a single place with literally a click of a few buttons. Seriously, how do you think I crank out 3 episodes a week with such ease? Another cool thing is that they allow me to interact with you guys, which gives me awesome ideas for new episodes and feedback on what you like the request to do more video episodes, right? Best of all, they do it for free. So if you're someone that wants to get a podcast started, but perhaps we're a little intimidated like myself, trust me when I say, just go for it and get started today by either downloading the Spotify for Podcasters app or going to www.spotify.com/podcasters. Trust me, you won't regret it. Hey guys, Akil here. Welcome back to the Trading Coach Podcast. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the new Spot Bitcoin ETF, as well as talk about the best and probably most simple and effective way to get started in investing if you're brand new and you're a little bit intimidated by maybe the complicated stuff that you see out there on the internet. Now, before we get started, do me a favor. Take a second to leave me a rating or a review. You can do it while listening to this. You don't have to pause or anything like that. Just open up a new deal and leave it. 5 stars if you think I deserve it, but also leave a few kind words. It's the best way to help me grow the podcast. We're consistently ranked in the top 10 of best trading podcasts out there, and I want to be number 1, but I need your help to do it. So rate, review, subscribe if you're new, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Today, I want to talk a little bit about the new Spot Bitcoin ETF. And like many episodes of the Trading Coach podcast, the topic comes from something that happened in my personal life. Over the weekend, I had a few different conversations on separate occasions, one with a very, very close friend of mine and another with a college buddy of mine that both kind of spoke about different elements of investing. The first conversations with the childhood friend of mine who has opened up a new business recently, or about a year ago, which is still recent for any business, and he was dealing with the fact that he had some customers that wanted to pay in Bitcoin, and he was having some questions about, how do I do that? How do I make it available so I can accept Bitcoin? Do I want to accept Bitcoin? Basically, what is the process of going through putting myself in place to receive Bitcoin and then cash it out, transfer it, all of that fun stuff, which is, it ended up being a more complicated process than what he wanted to do for his still startup, right? The second conversation had to do with investing in general. I had a friend that I haven't seen in a while since college, and of course everyone knows me as like the trading guy, right? The weird trading guy that ended up becoming successful. So of course, whenever they come, I get questions about investing and, oh man, that looks so cool, I really want to do that. And my response is typically, well, why don't you get started? Instead of just talking about it, let's get started doing it. And then I always kind of go on to give my advice on what I think is the best way to get started, and telling them that, hey, it's not as complicated as you think. All the stuff you see that I do in the videos, that's not investing, that's active trading. It's a little bit different. As far as active investing, start with something you know and put some money into it. Or if there's something you don't know, put it into an index and just on a consistent basis, put blank amount of your paycheck in there and just start putting yourself in the market so you have exposure. And we went on to start explaining like what the S&P was, because I was like, hey, if you don't want to pick an individual stock, just pick something that has a basket of the best stocks and put money in that. And she was kind of surprised that, like, wait a minute, there's this tool that takes all of the best things and puts it into one, and I can just invest in that, and it must cost $1 million. I'm like, well, yeah, not $1 million, but it's pretty bitty. Can't speak, coming off a sickness. Pretty pricey, but you don't actually buy the S&P. You would buy a fund that mimics the S&P and blah, 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 blah. And that got us on the topic of kind of ETF, which are exchange traded funds. And it just so happens that ETFs are in the news lately because last week, I think it was January 9th or 10th, one of them, I think the 9th was the fake out. The SEC had their X account hacked and people said it was passed and then it really wasn't passed. And I think the very next day, which was the 10th, it finally passed, which gave the ability for there to be a spot Bitcoin ETF. And this is something that I think has been they've been trying to get this passed for like 10, 11 years, a decade plus. And well, a lot of people had questions. Well, Akil, that's cool. I see it in the news. Crypto back. What exactly does that mean? So I just want to take a little bit of time to explain that to you today. So I guess we can start off with, before we get into the specifics of the Bitcoin ETF, what an ETF is. An ETF is an exchange traded fund. It is basically a tool that allows you to have exposure to a group or a portfolio of assets, and these can be all different types of assets. They can be commodities, they can be stocks, they can be real estate, but it's a fund that allows you to have access to a diverse kind of portfolio of assets and allow you to have exposure to it at a fraction of the cost. So you're not paying what all those assets would cost together. You're not paying what they would cost individually. The fund is kind of the asset that holds the portfolio, and the fund is treated kind of like a stock. So just instead of buying like Apple stock, you would buy a certain ETF, and that ETF would cost blank amount. Now, again, some of the positives of that is that there is diversification. It gives you access to more for less. And in general, the fees of simply investing in the ETF in general are lower than the fees of, saying, having someone manage your account. Now, there's a downside risk to that too, right? You're paying someone to manage your account if you're paying for like a managed account, because what they're doing is they're steering the ship. And when the waters get rough, like market crashes and stuff like that, they're here to limit the damage. With an ETF, right? It's a little bit different. It's kind of out there, and I don't want to say by itself, but it's not as actively managed as kind of a managed account would be. So there are some pros and cons of that, depending on how you look at it, right? Fees versus safety, I guess you can say. So the Bitcoin ETF, or the Spot Bitcoin ETF, I should say, is one of these exchange traded funds. And what's important about this one is that there were Bitcoin or crypto ETFs out there before, but they didn't actually have the assets on hand, I guess you could say. They were based off like derivatives, so like other contracts and whatnot, right? This one is actually, actually based on the physical Bitcoin, but the physical version of the digital Bitcoin. And these companies are actually holding the Bitcoins and whatnot. And what this does is it allows you to have access to Bitcoin without having or going through the same hassles that you would need to if you were trading in the crypto market. So I told you before, right? My buddy of mine that had the restaurant business, he was trying to figure out how to accept Bitcoin and all the stuff he had to set up in order to do that. And he was just like, man, it's not worth it. There's too much. I got to get this, the wallet, and blah, 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 blah. Why can't I just have it and cash out when I want to cash out? And this will give you the ability to do this. Again, these ETFs are traded like stocks. So you don't have to go through all the hoops of investing in Bitcoin. If you were to buy or invest into this Bitcoin ETF, it's basically just like buying a stock that represents Bitcoin. You can buy in, very simple, just going through your broker and exchange. You can cash out, very simple, the same way you would any other ETF or any other individual stock. Now, for me personally, this would be very key for people who don't plan on actually using Bitcoin. So again, if you're someone that is planning on buying Bitcoin because you plan on using it on the black market or wherever, or whoever accepts it, if anyone accepts Bitcoin, then obviously you want to have kind of the physical Bitcoins in your wallet and whatnot, just like having cash in your wallet for people that only accept cash. But if you're more of an investor, if you're like, hey, I don't actually plan on using Bitcoin, but I want to invest in it. I mean, I want to have exposure into it and hoping that the cost rise or sells if you're selling it. You don't need that digital wallet. It's kind of like having credit on it, I guess you can say. Now, one of the coolest things about this Spot Bitcoin ETF being approved is that it adds regulation to it, which was a big worry for a lot of people out there. So we know that the crypto market was a relatively new market, and there were a lot of concerns out there. There were a lot of frauds. We saw a lot of fake digital currencies being created, and people that are kind of rushing into this wave of like, this is the next big thing, this is the next big thing, this is the next big thing, being fooled and tricked and losing a lot of money. Now, I'm not saying that these regulations are foolproof. This ETF is very new. There are going to be bumps in the road, but there are regulations that are involved with this. So there's I guess a safety net included. It's not a foolproof safety net. The safety nets can still fail, but you'd much rather have a safety net in your investing than no safety nets, which is going to bring peace of mind to a lot of people. I know me personally, I've never been a big fan of crypto at all. I understand it from a speculator's perspective, right? Just supply and demand. If something's popular, then therefore the price will go up. But as a long-term investment, I never really saw the benefit in it until I saw an actual usage for it. So I always kind of figured it was something that would balloon and then kind of come back down to earth where it's at today. And that brings up another positive of this ETF, right? Because there is more safety, because it's more regulated, because it brings the price down instead of having to pay, I don't know how much Bitcoin is priced at right now, but instead of having to pay that price for Bitcoin right now, you can have access to it for cheaper. And what that's going to do is it's going to attract a lot of investors, right? A lot of investors still want to have some type of exposure to the crypto market. The problem is they were late, it got too expensive, and they're like, hey, I'm not paying that much, especially when we're not seeing the movement that we used to pay. Now that it's cheaper, it could become more of a common investment tool. I don't know how many institutions it's going to attract. From what I'm hearing right now, they're not too interested yet, but give it time. It's brand new. But from a common retail trader's perspective, it's more safe. It is cheap. It's a more professional way, I guess you can say, to have exposure. It's going to attract more people. And as you attract more people, that's going to bring more liquidity to the market. More liquidity to the market means less kind of wild and crazy swings. It's less of a roller coaster ride, which means kind of the more traditional forms of investing may play out. We see this in every market. I typically, and again, I just use Forex for example, and I've said this for crypto since it came. Everyone kept asking me, hey, why are these swings so wild? And I said, hey, it's a new market. Every time you have a new market, I saw the same thing with Forex. It's young, it's emotional. It's like my two children. They're full of energy. They're bouncing all over the place. They don't know what to do. And then what happens is, as it gets older, right, kind of it loses that shine, it loses that glitz and glamour, and that's kind of like the get rich quicker is kind of getting away from the market because they probably lost money trying to make a quick buck. And what you see is it slow down. It becomes kind of more thoughtful because you have a smarter investor that's involved. And when you have a smarter investor, you tend to see less sporadic movement. When you see less sporadic movement, those moves become more predictable. And that's something that we do in the Forex market and the stock market as well, where there are certain classic charting patterns that we know for centuries have worked because it's based off human behavior. Now, it doesn't work when the markets are going crazy with news or when everyone's like, buy Bitcoin, it's gone up 50% and everyone's running to it, right? Those are the irrational things that kind of make markets weird. But once markets kind of settle down and become more rational, as much of a rational markets can be, they become more predictable, which make it easier to invest, which make it easier to trade. So that's something that's going to be kind of cool to look at, because you can make some better predictions on, hey, if price gets this level, we're likely to do that. So that's another big positive that I see in there. Now, I guess the one negative that I see, or I guess the one main negative I see right now is that, prices are pretty high, and typically with ETFs, prices are going to be lower, fees are going to be lower, whatnot. But you got to keep in mind, like, this is new. This is it's a more expensive asset to collect because there's more hoops to go through when it comes to acquiring Bitcoin. So you're going to see prices high in the beginning, but what's going to happen is as more ETFs flood in, there's going to be competition. We know how supply and demand works, right? Some are going to get weeded out, of course, but some are going to have to lower their fee in order to compete. And as they continue to compete, and as some of these companies make their money back, of course, that's a bigger thing. They got to cover for the bottom line. You're going to see those fees decrease. I wouldn't be surprised if, in the next 2 years or so, we see fees come down to a normal rate, making it a lot more attractive. Now, as far as the bigger Bitcoin outlook, for me personally, this doesn't change my opinion at all on Bitcoin. I still don't personally value it. Again, and my investment type is called a common sense investment type, and I can't understand how Bitcoin has a future usage, not digital currencies. I get that 100%, but Bitcoin specifically. And until I see that, I'd be wary of any long-term investments. But that doesn't mean that you can't make money off of it. Because again, why do markets move? Well, they don't always move off of kind of the rational reasoning, right? They move based off what we think. They move off crowd psychology, human behavior. So if people tend to like something, if people tend to invest something, that means it has value, right? We see the same thing with athletes. Why does that athlete get paid that much? Well, because that's what the market says. They may not be that good, but if the market says they are worth this much, they will get paid that much and they deserve that much. It was the same thing with this. So hope that gives you kind of an idea of what just happened with Bitcoin, the Spot Bitcoin ETF, a little bit more about ETFs and investing as well. If you have any questions or comments or want to add anything, feel free to comment below. I know there's a section here on Spotify. There's a section on YouTube as well. As always, I'll read each and every one of them that come on those two platforms. And if you can't get them there, shoot me a DM. I read those too. All right, take care. Hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. Again, I'm very active on social media at Akil Stokes RTM. I'm off of Twitter right now because I had a password issue and their support is taking forever to respond. So if you hit me up on Twitter, I won't be able to respond. But if you find me on Instagram at Akil Stokes RTM, if you have any questions or comments about anything, shoot me a DM. I love to talk trading. I love to talk investing. I love to talk to you guys because you guys help me provide content for the rest of you guys. All right, until next time, plan your trade, trade your plan. Take care.